Hello and welcome to the Art of Caro. In this video I'm going to show you how I made this bodice and the skirt that goes with it out of half a single size duvet cover. Just to give you a picture of how much fabric that is, in Sweden the standard size for a single duvet cover is 210 times 150 centimeters, and I used a little bit less than that for this. This bodice and skirt are not meant to be historically accurate. It's a history-bounding dress, though the skirt is based off the pattern in 18th century dressmaking by American Duchess, but I'm using modern methods to sew it. This bodice is made using a simplicity pattern that I altered a bit in the princess seam, and I added a piece here in the back side because the fit there was a bit weird. So if you're interested in seeing how I made these, just keep on watching. Yeah, so this is the fabric I'm going to be using. It's a thrifted duvet cover that I bought for 30 Swedish crowns. It's this muted purple with white flowers on one side, and on the other side it's white with purple flowers. I'm gonna be using the purple side mainly for this project, I think. At the very least I'm gonna use it for the bodice. It's about 2 meters of fabric in each color. I'm thinking I'm gonna use as much as needed for the bodice, and then see how much I have left for the skirt. It's gonna be a history-bounding dress. It's not gonna be historically accurate or something like that. It's just gonna be reminiscent of something historical, and most of all it's gonna be comfy. It's gonna be nice for me to wear. I don't want to make clothes that don't feel nice for me. Yeah, so I'm gonna use this as my fashion fabric, or whatever it's called, and then I'm gonna use this. It's a hand-me-down sheet. It's really nicely woven. I think it might even be hand woven, but it has a couple of holes in it. But the rest of the sheet is rather sturdy, so I'm gonna be using this for the lining. And then I have a third layer. This third layer is going to be in the middle of these layers, probably. And this is actually my mock-up, and it's a really sturdy twill cotton. And as you can probably see, it's covered in cat hair. It attracts cat hair like crazy. I made a skirt out of this, and it just attracts it like incredibly. So I don't want to use it for anything that's going to be visible anymore, because my cats, they shed like crazy no matter how much I brush them. Or yeah, so fabrics that don't attract cat hair is cat fur is preferable. So I'm going to put this one between the different cotton fabrics, the thinner cotton fabrics, to make them more sturdy, provide a bit more structure to the piece. Just for the bodice, after I have defurred them, or no, yeah, after I've removed the fur. Now I'm gonna have to seam rip the duvet cover pretty carefully, so I can preserve as much fabric as possible for my project. And yeah, this is kind of an experiment. I'm usually a bit more methodical, I think more about my project before I start working on them, but this one has been a bit more loose and like relaxed, so we'll see how that works out. I'm gonna get started on ripping up the fabric so I can use it, and then I'm gonna cut out the pieces. Yeah, I'm being very careful not to damage the selvage, which I discovered is very nice, and I'm making sure not to poke any holes in the fabric. And then I'm just quickly ironing the part of the fabric that I'm going to cut out my bodice out of. And then I'm using my mock-up pieces to cut out my outer fabric. I'm fiddling around a bit to figure out how I want the flowers to look on my pieces, and decide that I want the flowers to be visible on my front pieces, and a flower sort of in the center back of my back piece, and the other pieces I don't really care that much about. They're going to be under my arms. I can do that because I know I can easily fit all the pieces on the width of the fabric. The only thing I'm concerned about is preserving the length of the fabric, so I can have as long a skirt as possible. Just adding in the notches on from the pattern pieces, because when I did my mock-up they disappeared in some places, but I changed them on my pattern pieces. Yeah, and then I'm just going to really messily and quickly cut out the pieces out of the fabric, so I can move it over to my desk for a more proper cutting, like cutting them out as they are supposed to be. And then I'm removing the pins and marking up the pieces to make sure that they are going to be sewn together properly. I'm just numbering them and indicating whether the pattern pieces was print side up or down. And then I'm pinning the back pieces and the side back pieces together. This side back pieces was the alteration I'd made to my mock-up. Like the added, I did some small alteration otherwise too. Then I'm marking the dots that I'm going to do an easing stitch between. And then I'm repeating the process, but on my inner lining layer. I'm putting my pieces a bit more closely because this is a nice sheet and I want to be able to use it for other projects. Yeah, and I'm cutting them out. And here I'm not removing the pins because they are going to be constructed like they are all one piece, like the both layers are the same piece. And then I'm just basting them together in the middle so they don't slide around. And I do this using a yellow thread to make sure I can see them. And then I'm pinning the side back pieces, and now I'm sewing the easing stitch. It's just a basting stitch, and then I'm going to pin the part of the piece that's above and below the easing dots, and then ease the ease in the part between them. This is like the second time I'm doing this. The mock-up was the first, so I'm not very familiar with the process, but I got it to work, and it doesn't look gathered on the other side. It just looks like it's a straight stitch. So I'm just sewing those together, being very careful when I'm sewing over the easing part to make sure that the fabric just under the needle is flat, so it won't look gathered. And then I'm sewing the back pieces and sewing together the front pieces and the back pieces and the shoulders. And then I'm moving on to my outer layer and repeating the same process. And then I'm going through it all and removing the basting stitch for both the layers. And then I'm very carefully sewing super close to the edge on the part that is going to have the lacing, just as close to the edge as I can. And then I'm adding a zip tie and use a zipper foot to sew as close to that as possible to create a boning channel, and I'm going to use that dollar store zip tie for my boning. Then I'm using my grommets to measure out how big of a gap I need between boning channels, because I'm going to add a second boning channel to make the front a bit more sturdy. So I just sewed a straight line, and then I added I repeat the process that I did with the first one, and then I just remove those and I put them back, and then I measure out how long they are going to be, and then I clip them to be the right size, and then I use the sandpaper to sand out the edges so they don't poke out of the fabric later on. Then I trim my seams and cut off the notches and make little notches in the seams over the curves. But I think that I did that the wrong way. It turned out a little weird, but I made it work. And then I'm pressing the seams open, and I'm using different parts of that sleeve board to iron the edges and the places that get awkward when it's laid out flat on a larger surface. It's a little bit fiddly, but it worked out. And then I'm once again removing all the fur because it's like that fabric is like a magnet when it comes in contact with cat fur. And I removed it previously when I put together the white and the black layer, so doesn't have cat hair trapped between the layers. And then I'm just pinning together the two layers, or three layers, but like the outer layer and the lining layers. And I used that sleeve board to make it easier with certain angles. And then I'm just cutting away some seams that stuck out. Then I'm carefully doing a basting stitch the whole way around where I've just pinned, like 8 millimeters in from the edge, just to keep the pieces together. I'm doing this all the way around except for the center front where I put the boning, because it's super close to the edge and I can't use the machine to sew over it again. Though I did make an attempt, but I figured out almost immediately that it wouldn't work, even if I used the zipper foot. So I just whipped over the edge by hand to make sure that the fabric stayed in place when I'm putting the grommets later on. Just quickly and messily. It's going to be covered later on. Then I used the grommets to measure out how I want them to be placed, and used a chalk pen to mark out where I wanted them. And I tried to use the tool that you're supposed to use to punch holes in the fabric, but it wouldn't work because the twill fabric was too thick. It wouldn't get through it. So I used a awl instead, and I mean it worked, but some of the grommets turned out weird, and it was sort of sharp edges that stack out, like not like super sharp, but enough that it caught on the lacing. But I figured out a way to fix that later on. So I'm just putting in the grommets, and it took a while, and I'm happy I got it finished before it got too late, so I could finish it in one sitting instead of having to space it out between days. And then I'm removing all the basting. And here I'm just lacing up the bodice with a string I have left from my corset. Yeah, I like this. It turned out well. It's gonna be like a sort of a wearable mock-up. I'm going to pull it down a bit more so you can see it. Yeah. This is what it looks like. I'm just gonna, yeah, like that. And I was a bit worried about these princess seams, and because I adjusted them so it would give me a bit more of a bust support without wearing a bra, but I think it worked out. Yeah, I'm gonna hide these away so they don't just dangle and attract cats. But yeah, I think it turned out really well. I'm gonna add some white bias tape along the edges, and I'm just wondering, should I just take a little bit out of the arm here so I don't, because it's a little bit annoying here. But I don't know, it can just be because I can't. It's a bit weird in the back here on this one, but I'm considering this sort of a wearable mock-up. So I'm going to probably make a different one where I adjust the back, and also make the lower part a bit more pointy, and I'm gonna maybe do like a bigger lacing gap, so I can make like an sort of 1700s dress inspired thing. But I think I'm gonna be happy with this. Looks good. And here I'm just pinning the bias binding around the outside of the bodice. And figuring out how I'm supposed to do that on the corners was a bit difficult actually. But I figured it out eventually. And then I'm sewing that down, being careful to not mess up my corners. And as you can see, my pins were facing the wrong way, and that was super annoying. Not a mistake I'm going to make again, I don't think. Yeah, and then I'm folding it over and putting some pins in to make it stay that way, so I can base it down later on. I've learned that I need to base everything I want to sew by hand to keep the pin injuries to a minimum. So apparently I just skipped over my basting of the binding. So this is me just sewing down the binding using a whip stitch and securing the corner there on both sides, and the outside I am careful to make those stitches as small and as invisible as possible. And I'm just catching the lining when I sew it down. And then I'm removing the basting that I made on the binding. And then I'm adding more bias binding to the arm side. It was kind of awkward to get it to work around the arm side. You had to fiddle a bit more. And then I carefully sewed that down, and I removed a part of my my sewing machine so I could use this sleeve function so I can move it around. And then I'm folding over the bias binding again, not again for that part, but you know what I mean. And then I'm pinning it, and here I actually injured my hand a couple of times on the pins and bled on some of the binding. Fortunately, a part I could just trim off, and I injured myself again when I was doing the basting here, and I got blood on the thread as well, which was yeah, it's a lot of blood here, but no stains on the white fabric, so success. And then I'm just whipping down those edges as well. And then this is my solution for the sharpness in the grommets. I'm just using a button stitch to cover the grommets using a button thread. And I do that for all the grommets, even the ones that didn't have that problem. And I think they look a bit more neat. I got some proper string to use for the lacing, so I'm going to lace it up and see how much of it I need, and then I'm going to melt the edges, because this is a polyester thread or string or whatever. So we'll see how it works. Yeah, so I had a lot of the string, and I had to fight with my cats not to be scratched up when I was lacing it. And I had severely overestimated how much string I would need, so I got to trim off a lot of it. But I can use that in a future project, so it wasn't like a big deal. I just my math is awful. And then I'm going to make an attempt at burning the edges of this string. As you can see, it like unwinds easily, and it caught on fire. It apparently isn't as much polyester as advertised, so I just put some glue on the edges to make sure they didn't fray or unwind more. And I'm taking my remaining fabric and even out those uneven edges on either side, and then I'm going to pin the fabric to find out what the middle is, and I apparently did this twice. And and then I'm just making a notch with my scissor and removing all the pins, and then I just tear that fabric to get 2 even halves of the fabric, and then I'm going to iron them out properly, and ironing out the selvages, which has been folded for this duvet cover's lifetime, so they take a lot of pressing to get sort of flat, because they were not sewn as far out as I want to be able to sew mine. And then I'm just using a spray bottle to spray a bit extra water on the fabric to make it easier to get all the wrinkles out. And then I'm pinning up the side on both sides, and my cat is hanging out with me. And then I'm going to consult the 18th century dressmaking book by American Duchess to find out how far down I'm going to put the lacing, or how big I want to make the pocket slits, I mean. And then I'm sewing the side seams, and I'm not going to do anything with the selvages or like my seam allowance, except for around the pocket slits where I'm going to have to stitch them down. But the rest of the seam allowance I'm not going to bother with, because the selvages are so nice, so no chance of fraying or anything. So I'm basting that down. As you saw previously, I pressed down the seam allowance, obviously, and here I'm basting, so I don't have to keep injure myself on the pins. And as you can see, I drink a lot of tea, especially when I'm sitting there hand sewing. And then I just carefully whip stitch the edges, and I'm just going through like 1 or 2 threads on the outer fabric, so it's almost completely invisible unless you get really, really close to it. It takes a little bit more time, but it's not as time consuming as you would think. When you get into the habit of it, it's pretty easy to just catch a small amount of the other fabric. Here I'm going to start to attempt pleating, but my cat wants to be out under the fabric, which isn't the easiest thing to work around. So I'm doing a box pleat, and I'm attaching the edge of the fabric to the edge and trying to figure out like the middle points of the fabric, and I'm working on this for quite a while, and and then I'm going over to the other side, but then I'm going to discover that I've worked with the wrong size of width the whole time. This is my full waist size, not my half waist size. So I have to unpin everything, and I don't think I even discovered it. Yeah, it took me a while. So this is this pleating is obviously done off camera because my camera died trying to figure it out, and then I worked for like 5 hours to figure it out. So I'm just sewing that straight onto my waistband, first with a bit more of a lacy stitch, and then I'm just stitching from the other side straight at the edge of my waistband. And here I'm pressing down the waistband, folding it over and pressing it down, and making sure that my pleats are lying even. And then I'm basting that down. Lots of basting when you're hand sewing. And here I'm sewing down the edge of that waist tape to make sure it's not waist tape, waistband, to make sure it stays folded. And then I'm going to sew down the waistband onto the front of the fabric, and I'm using a I don't know what this stitch is called in either language, I don't think, but I'm like going in diagonally when I'm going under the fabric, and like straight down when I'm putting the needle in from where it came up, so it's not very visible on the front. On the outside, you have to like stick your face close to it to see it, and I hope people won't do that when I'm wearing this. And then I'm just making the hem, folding up the hem, and I'm folding it once at 1 centimeter, and the second time it ended up being like 12 millimeters when it was folded over again. Okay, so I'm done with the bodice and I'm done with the skirt. I've hemmed the skirt with the white thread because that's what I had, and I'm very happy with both of the pieces on their own, but together you can see it's a gap here. I should have extended the bodice by 2 centimeters, maybe 2.5, to get to my natural waistline. Apparently I didn't notice that when I was trying on the mock-up. I should have tried it with a better skirt, but yeah. So you have this weird gap where you not only see the entire waistband of the skirt, you also see the shirt I'm wearing underneath. So what I'm thinking I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add some ties to the inside of the bodice, just some cotton yarn. I think it's gonna work. I'm gonna add some here in the front and some in the back and maybe some at the sides, so I can make the skirt stay here under the bodice. I think that looks a lot better. It's more the effect I'm going for. Yes, this works also, but it's not making me super happy when I look at it, and I want my clothes to make me feel happy and comfortable and stuff like that. I also think then that in the future, if I do another one of these skirts, I'm gonna look a bit more carefully for another piece of it's cotton tape, I think it's called in English, because this is so I don't really remember what I was talking about. What was I talking about? I think it was about, if I'm going to make another one of these skirts, I'm probably gonna look around a bit more for this for a different sort of cotton tape thing, because this one is a bit stiff and a little bit rough, and it's not super nice around my waist. It's probably not something that most people would have a problem with. I'm just very sensitive, so in the future I'm probably gonna look at something else, but this was the only one they had that was bleached white. Otherwise there were unbleached white, and it looked weird together with the binding that I've made on the bodice. So I'm gonna add some ties now.
So I scrapped that idea almost immediately. It didn't work. So instead I'm adding snap buttons to the bodice and to the skirt, and make them line up with each other when I wear them both.
Okay, so I'm finished adding the snaps to the bodice and the skirt. As you can see, if we compare with the skirt panel, this is the back of the skirt. So at the center back and at the sides where the panels connect, I've put snaps on both the bodice and the skirt, and I've done the same to the front of the skirt as well. They just snap together like this, and then when I'm wearing this as a complete dress, it doesn't have any gapping here at the waist. It just looks like it's a complete piece, but you can still wear them separately if you want. And I don't think the snaps on the skirt is super distracting or noticeable. I'm probably gonna be able to wear this skirt on its own without this being like something that looks super weird. And on the bodice, it's all on the inside, so it doesn't appears on the outside at all. And it doesn't affect the comfort as much as I was afraid of. It's actually like pretty comfy garment all in all.
And here is the finished garments, and I'm just showing you how I put them on. I clip the bodice to the back panel of the skirt and tie that around my waist, and then I tie the front panel of the skirt, and I make sure to hide the waist ties at my hips instead of getting like a bump in the front or back. And then I shrug into the bodice and clip the front side of the skirt to that. I found it much more easy to lace up the bodice when I did that first. And the lacing goes so much more easier after I added that melting glue to the ends, like anglets. And then I make some bust adjustments, and I just make sure the shirt underneath sits well. And now you can enjoy some reveal video. Sorry, it's a bit weird. I'm still learning how to use this camera. Enjoy!
happy with how this turned out. Apart from those things I talked about earlier, it's comfortable and easy to move in, and I love how it looks. The waistband is also much more comfortable now when I'm wearing it over a petticoat, so that fixed that problem for me. All in all, it's a success. I'm kind of loving the fit of it. It's great. I already have a video planned where I'm going to make a pair of 18th century pockets to go underneath the skirt. I have the materials, and I'm going to make that out of a pair of thrifted pillow covers. So if you want to see that, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of my future videos. And if you enjoyed watching me make this, you can let me know by hitting the like button. You can check the box below for my other social media and other info. That's all for this video. May the stars shine upon your faces and have a glorious day. Thank you, and goodbye for now.